Quick warning, the things that this man did to women and even his own mother are so gross, so foul, you are going to feel sick. He's known as one of the most notorious serial killers in American history who craved being a genius and being in control and being strong, when in reality, he was a pathetic incel with mommy issues. So many times when we talk about serial killers, you hear people say, there were no signs. He was a normal guy. We never saw this coming. Well, this is not the case when it comes to Ed Kemper, the co-ed butcher. Ed's parents had a loveless marriage, and from everything I've read, everyone says that Ed's mother was not a nice lady, and when Ed was 9 years old, his father, who he really looked up to, left the family to get away from his wife. Reportedly, Ed's mother mistreated him a lot when he was a child. She verbally abused him, belittled him, told him that no woman would ever love him, and she would even lock him at night down in the cold, dark basement because she was afraid of him. And I need to stress that I don't think her methods were right at all. I don't think locking a child in a dark basement at night because you're afraid of them is right at all. All I'm saying is I understand where she's coming from because Ed was a scary child. The red flags started when he was 7 years old or possibly even younger. He would want to play these very violent games with his two sisters. He would also cut the heads off his sister's dolls. And then when he was a second grader, so like 7 years old, he began to stalk his second grade teacher. He was obsessed with her and would follow her home. At 10 years old, he took the family's cat and buried it alive in the backyard. And then when he was 13 years old, they got another cat to replace the one that he unalived, and then he unalived that cat as well. This time, even in a more violent way, he took one of those sharp weapons that you find in the kitchen to unalive this cat. So that's what I'm trying to say. I don't think what Ed's mom did was right at all. I'm just saying I understand why she's afraid of him. When Ed was like 14, 15 years old, he tried to escape his mother's mistreatment by running away to go find his father and live with his father. But when he found his father, his dad rejected him and sent him to go live with his paternal grandparents. Everything that Ed was trying to escape when he ran away from his mother, he found in his grandmother. She treated him like the exact same way that his mother treated him. It was only 10 months into Ed living with his grandparents. One afternoon, his grandfather was out running errands. His grandmother was just sitting at the kitchen table. I guess her and Ed got in a fight, and Ed just gets up, he goes and grabs a weapon and just starts firing shots at his grandmother, unaliving her. And then when his grandfather got back from running errands, he met him outside and then shot him dead in the driveway. He's only 15. He's just killed two people. He calls his mom, who he hates so much and is trying to get away from, and is like, hey, I just killed two people. I don't know what to do. And his mom says, you need to call the police. So Ed called the police. 15-year-old Ed was taken into custody and he was put into a maximum security facility for the criminally insane, where he would often speak with psychiatrists. He was also given an IQ test where he scored a near genius IQ of a 136. But Ed was released only 5 years later with an erased record, like it never happened on his official record. He was also listed as low risk to reoffend, which obviously is not true if we're talking about him today. Actually, he became a serial killer only a couple years later. Ed, who is now in his early 20s, moves back in with his mother, but now he thinks that he's a genius who can outsmart the system. He actually had a dream of becoming a police officer, if you can even imagine that. Ed Kemper, notorious serial killer, being a police officer, but he was actually rejected for being too big, too tall. I didn't even know that there was like a maximum height requirement for becoming a police officer, but Ed was abnormally ginormous. He was 6'9" and like 300 pounds. After being rejected to become a police officer, he kind of became like a police officer groupie. He would hang out where they would hang out. He would often go to this certain bar that was like right across the street from the police station called the Jury Room. He would spend all his time there befriending all the police officers. So it's Santa Cruz, California, 1970s. There's a lot of hitchhikers at the time in the area, including a lot of like pretty young college students that are hitchhiking from place to place. Ed did not have an easy time with the ladies, so he began picking up pretty young hitchhikers that he found attractive. It was on May 7th, 1972, Ed picked up two hitchhikers. They were both 18-year-old students from Fresno State University named Marianne and Anita. He picked them up. He then took them to a secluded area where he unalived them. He then brought their bodies back to his home where he SA'd their remains. This is a common occurrence, him SAing the unalived bodies of his victims. He then took off their heads and dismembered them. Partial remains of Marianne were found, but sadly to this day, the remains of Anita were never found. In September of that year, Ed picked up a hitchhiker. She was a 15-year-old girl, a high school student, a dance student named Aiko. She was hitchhiking because she needed to get to her dance class and she missed the bus. When Ed picked her up, he drove them to a secluded location and then told her that he wanted to unalive himself, but he just wanted someone to be there with him when he did it, so he wasn't alone. At one point, he actually gets out of the car, but he actually locked himself out of the car, leaving her and a weapon in the car, but was able to convince her to open the door for him, and then when she did that, he immediately unalived her. And then he took her body back to his house where he did the same unspeakable things to her remains that he did with Marianne and Anita. In January of 1973, Ed picked up another hitchhiker, 18-year-old Cindy. He unalived her in the car, brought her body back to his mother's house, kept her body in the closet overnight, and then when his mother left for work the next morning, he took out her body, he essayed her body, and then took off her head and dismembered her. He then buried her head in the backyard of his mother's house, but he buried her head so it was like pointed up towards his mother's bedroom, and he did this because his mother always wanted people to look up to her. He thinks he's funny making these jokes. He's not funny, but he thinks he's funny. He's sick. 1 month later, Ed picked up 2 more students, 23-year-old Rosalind and 20-year-old Allison, and again, he did the same awful things to them and then to their bodies. I think the reason that Ed killed women is because he hated his mother. I believe that every single time he was taking the lives of one of his victims, he was envisioning her. I think the reason that his first ever victim was his grandmother, who reminded him so much of his mother. She treated him the exact same way. She was mean to him like his mother. He always says this. I think the person that he always wanted dead was his mother. I think this was the person that he always wanted to kill. And then in April of 1973, he did just that. It was April 20th, 1973. While his mother slept, he snuck into her room with a hammer and bludgeoned her. He then removed her head. He says he put it up on the fireplace mantle and screamed at it for hours. He then used his mother's head as a dartboard. And then, this is going to be really, really gross, he took his own mother's head and used it to satisfy himself. Later on, he called his mother's best friend, a 59-year-old woman named Sally. He invited her over to watch a movie and have dinner, but as soon as she arrived, he unalived her as well. I don't think he's ever given it an explanation to why he did that to her. Ed is only 24 years old. It's only been 4 years since he was released from that facility as a low risk to reoffend person. He's just killed 8 people after killing 2 people, his grandparents, when he was 15 years old. Clearly, the system is very failed. Ed then drives 18 hours throughout the night straight to Colorado from California. I think his plan was to escape and start, killing somewhere else, but he had a long time to drive, and I think he realized that it's over. The person that he always wanted to kill, his mother, is now dead. So when he gets to Colorado, he calls the Santa Cruz Police Department and tells them everything. He makes a full confession. But the thing is, they think it's a prank call. They think their buddy Ed is being funny because remember, Ed is close friends with all the police officers, and he has to literally convince them that he's the reason that all of these young girls are disappearing or winding up dead. Ed Kemper was found guilty. He tried to say that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, but he was found sane, and he was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences where he's still alive today, serving his time. He's about 75 years old, and he is still currently locked up in a psychiatric center. If you watched to the end of this video, thank you so much. I don't know how you got it through because it was very disturbing, very, very gross, like all my content, honestly. If you guys ever want to see anything else other than true crime, let me know. But of course, let me know in the comments what you think about this case, and if there's any other case you want to see me cover next, or another notorious serial killer you want to see me cover. Thank you guys so much. I love you, and I will see you tomorrow. This man locked his daughter in the basement for 24 years and forced her to have 7 of his children. It's one of the most notorious kidnappings in history and a crime that truly shocked the world. This man makes me feel ill. Josef Fritzl and his wife Rosemarie had 7 children, but Josef always had a very bizarre obsession with his one daughter Elizabeth and began essaying her when she was only 11 years old. Josef says that he chose Elizabeth because she was the daughter that most resembled his own mother. Like, yuck. His wife, Rosemarie, claims that she had no idea that this abuse was going on, but it is important to note that after they were married for about 10 years, Josef spent a year in prison for breaking into a woman's home and essaying her at knife point. So this woman definitely knew the man that she was married to. Elizabeth tried multiple times to escape her father's abuse by running away, but since she was a minor, she would always be brought back home by the police, no questions asked. So when Elizabeth turned 18, she was a legal adult now. She planned to move out. She had a job all lined up. She had all the plans set, but her father, Joseph, could not allow this. It was shortly after Elizabeth turned 18, her father, Joseph, asked her help bringing down a heavy door into their basement. For the past 6 years, Joseph told his family that he was redoing the basement so he had a place to work, but what he was really doing was building a secret prison underneath the family home. And the door that he asked Elizabeth to help him bring down would be the door that she would be locked behind for 24 years. Elizabeth was locked down in the basement, no sunlight, no fresh air, nothing to do, no one to talk to. The only person she would see would be her father, Joseph, her captor, when he would come downstairs to bring her small amounts of food and water and to essay her. Elizabeth's mother, Rosemary, and the rest of the family are concerned about where Elizabeth went, so they went and reported her missing. So Joseph forced Elizabeth to write a letter to the family saying that, she ran away, don't look for her. So her case was closed, but she was in the basement. She was in the basement and no one was looking for her. After 5 years of captivity, at the age of 23, Elizabeth gave birth to her first baby all alone, and this would be the first of 7 children she was forced to have with her own father. One of these babies was sadly born very, very sick. Elizabeth begged Joseph to take the baby to the hospital, but he didn't because he thought it would blow his cover. So the baby sadly passed away after only being 3 days old, and then Joseph put its body in the furnace. Joseph did not think there was enough room in the basement for all these babies that Elizabeth was being forced to have, so Joseph allowed Elizabeth to keep her 3 older children. But when she gave birth to the 3 younger children, Joseph stole them from her, you guys, and then he would wrap them up, put them in a basket, and then put them on the front porch step for his wife, Rosemary, to find. Then Joseph and Rosemary would raise these babies, and Joseph would attach each baby with a little note from Elizabeth, their long-lost daughter, saying that she had this baby, but she was leaving it on the doorstep because she couldn't raise it. So Rosemary was raising 3 of her grandchildren, but they were really the children of her daughter and her husband. And because Joseph is such a sick individual, he would take photos of the 3 children that were allowed to live above ground, doing normal things like swimming in swimming pools, playing in the snow, having birthday parties, and then he would take those photos and show them to the children that were being forced to live underground that had never even seen sunlight in their entire lives, to show them what they were missing out on. And if you're wondering how Rosemary or any of the rest of the family ever found that all these children and missing Elizabeth were living in the basement, well, for one, they were banned from going down there, but he also rigged it so in case anyone ever actually did go down there, they wouldn't find it. So you see there's the stair. These are the stairs from upstairs, downstairs, and this is a utility room, and this is where he would say he would work. And then this red door was hidden behind a bookcase, so no one would see that there was this huge prison where all these people were being held captive. So in 2008, after Elizabeth has been locked up underground for 24 years, she's in her 40s now. Remember, she got locked underground when she was 18. Her oldest child, 19-year-old Kirsten, got seriously sick. Kirsten seriously needed medical attention or she probably wasn't going to survive. So again, Elizabeth begged Joseph to take Kirsten to the hospital, but of course, at first he said absolutely not. But then he changed his mind because he probably realized that if she did die, what would he do with the body? He couldn't just lift out a grown woman's body up the stairs of the basement and no one would see it. And then once he did do that, if he could do that, what would he do with it afterwards? So Joseph did bring her to the hospital. At the hospital, Kirsten was in terrible condition, and the hospital was really suspicious because there was no record of this person existing before she came into the hospital. She had white hair. Her skin was so pale, it was almost translucent. She was 19 years old, but honestly, guys, they were thinking this person was 40 years old because remember, she's never seen sunlight in her entire life. So the hospital actually contacts the police, and the police go there. They're trying to talk to Joseph, but he's not giving anything up. He thinks he's really, really smart, and he thought he had total control and was so smart, in fact, that he went and got Elizabeth, his daughter, that he's had locked up for over 2 decades, and had her come out of the basement for the first time in 24 years to go talk to the police and clear everything up. So the police are now talking to Elizabeth, who also has white hair. She's in her 40s, but she looks 60. Everyone looked 20 years older than they were supposed to. Her skin is also pale as paper, and they're grilling Elizabeth, and she's not giving any answers either, but they're not taking no for an answer. They keep pushing her, and they're pushing Elizabeth until she broke down and finally confessed everything. The police, they go to the house, they find the cellar, they find the other children, and the interesting thing about this is the investigators that were in that cellar for, not that long a time, they were just walking around it, finding these children. They were so traumatized by the sight of this prison that these people were being held captive in that many of them needed therapy after. So just think about these grown men just in this cellar, this basement, this prison for a small amount of time needing therapy. Imagine how messed up everyone else was that was locked in there their entire lives pretty much. Elizabeth was 18 years old when she went down. She was in there for 24 years. She spent more time in that basement than she did out of the basement. I'm 26 years old, being locked in the basement for 24 years, that's an entire lifetime for most of the people that are probably watching this video right now. So Joseph was obviously arrested, and at first he tried to deny everything. He said that his relationship with his daughter was consensual and that the children liked living in the cellar, but this obviously did not work, and eventually he did plead guilty on all charges and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. He has spent most of his sentence so far in a hospital for the criminally insane, but he was transferred to real prison very recently in May of 2024, where he is now eligible for parole, but I doubt he will get it. But let me know what you think. Elizabeth and her 6 children are living under new identities in a small village somewhere in Austria, and I really, really do hope the best for them. They're living completely out of the public eye. They don't do interviews. I think we should respect whatever wishes they had. I know a lot of people try to show up to that village trying to interview them. That's gross. Leave them alone. They all do need ongoing therapy, which is completely understandable. Also, Elizabeth, for a long time, held a lot of resentment against her mother, Rosemary, which is also completely understandable. I'm really, really interested to hear from Rosemary, though, if she ever does choose to do an interview, which I don't think she would, because I want to know what she thought when all this came to light and realizing that her missing daughter has been underground the entire time by the hands of her own husband. We do know that Elizabeth eventually did forgive her mother, and they apparently have a really, really strong, loving relationship, and I truly do hope the best for all of them. Please let me know all your thoughts on this case in the comments. You guys have been begging me to cover this case for the longest time. While you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next, and until then, I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow. This is everything we know so far about the P. Diddy case and the allegations against him, explained in less than 7 minutes. So it turns out that the red flags revolving Sean Combs, also known as P. Diddy Puff Daddy Puffy, have been prevalent since the start of his career. So it's shocking that he was able to get away with everything for so long. So Puffy actually started working in the music industry at a very young age and had his own record label, Bad Boy Records, by the age of 24. Diddy's label, Bad Boy Records, and a West Coast label called Death Row Records were rivals during the 90s East Coast, West Coast hip-hop rivalry, and what started out as maybe just friendly competition quickly turned deadly, and multiple people that were in the middle of it ended up being murdered, including Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls, and both of their deaths Diddy has been rumored to be in the center of since the late 90s. During Diddy's entire career, he's been sued and arrested for multiple violent crimes and has never been held responsible. He either was acquitted or the charges were dropped, or he was able to pay people off. In one of these incidents, 3 people were shot in a crowded nightclub, and P. Diddy and his then girlfriend J-Lo were both arrested for it, but neither of them ended up serving any time. Since everything has come out, people have really been side-eyeing J-Lo and also anyone that used to hang out with P. Diddy and go to his parties. I honestly would not be surprised if P. Diddy is offered a plea deal and half of Hollywood end up getting arrested. When Diddy was 38 years old, he signed a 19-year-old artist named Cassie Ventura to his record label Bad Boy Records, and he was obsessed with her from the beginning. Remember, he's 38 and she's only 19 years old, and he would not take no for an answer. The two of them did date for about a decade, but I would not say that this relationship was consensual. This was definitely a forced relationship. He was able to pretty much dangle her career and all of her dreams in her face if she would not comply and obey him. Diddy would also force Cassie to take substances against her will and would often SA her. He would often also force her to take these substances and then sleep with other random men while he either watched or recorded them. These are what Diddy called freak-offs, and these would often last several days, and afterwards Cassie would need to be hooked up to IV liquids because she was so dehydrated. Just think about it. And we ended up finding out later on that Cassie was unfortunately not the only victim of these freak-offs. Cassie was also not allowed to work on her music, which was her passion, unless she participated in these freak-offs. Cassie was often also brutally beaten by P. Diddy if she would not comply, and in 2016, Diddy attacked Cassie in a hotel and then paid the hotel staff for the surveillance footage, which has now been leaked online. And in 2018, Cassie did luckily escape Diddy's abuse. And then in 2022, the state of New York passed the Adult Survivors Act, which gave victims a 1-year window to hold their abusers accountable, even if the statute of limitations had already passed. And this was the same act that found presidential candidate Donald Trump liable in an essay that he committed in 1996. So in November of 2023, under this act, Cassie filed a lawsuit against Diddy, and this would be the beginning of the end. In this lawsuit, Cassie accused Diddy of physical and psychological abuse as well as SA, also that he used to force her to take substances against her will and then force her to engage in SA acts with other random men. Also accused Diddy of trying to kill multiple people, including an incident where Diddy held a woman by her ankles off a 24-story building. Following Cassie's lawsuit, 3 more victims of Diddy ended up filing their own lawsuits against Diddy, and these were underage people accusing him of SAing them and drugging them. And then, like I'm sure all of you guys know, in March of 2024, Homeland Security got a warrant to raid Diddy's homes in Miami and LA in an SA trafficking investigation. They ended up finding and taking with them a lot of evidence. This was technology, this was recordings, and also infamously, they found over 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant, as well as a bunch of adult toys. Extremely recently, on September 16th, 2024, P. Diddy was arrested in New York on charges of SA trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy, plus some other charges. He has pled not guilty. He seems very confident that he will be found not guilty. So far, his bail has been denied, and the prosecution is very, very confident that they have plenty of evidence against him to convict him. If P. Diddy is found guilty, he is facing life in prison with a minimum sentence of 15 years in prison. Then since then, over 120 victims, both male and female, have come out with their own accusations against P. Diddy, 25 of which were only minors, with the youngest being 9 years old. So this was actually really, really hard to research, which is why it's taking me so long to make this video. I feel like things are coming out every other day. There's also been a lot of rumors, but I do want to address 2 of those rumors. So we all know who Usher is. Turns out when Usher was only 13 years old, Diddy, who was an adult at the time, had legal guardianship over 13-year-old Usher, and there has been rumors that Diddy had SA'd Usher when he was a child, literally 4 years. Also, when Justin Bieber was 15 years old, he used to hang out with P. Diddy. Allegedly, he would go to parties with P. Diddy when he was only a minor, spend days on days with him at a time. I've seen a concerning amount of people on social media say that Justin Bieber needs to come out and say if anything happened with him and P. Diddy. I hope I don't see any of those comments on this video. Victims never owe you a statement. Justin Bieber wants to come out and say something one day. That's completely up to him. The man has a baby on the way also, so please just leave him alone. Don't leave any of those comments here. I just wanted to address that because I've been seeing a concerning amount of people say that Justin Bieber needs to make a statement. That's all I have for right now. I'm really, really interested to get you guys' take on this. How deep do you think this is? Also, how many people you think are involved in this that are like A-list celebrities, household names? Also, do you think that he will be sentenced to life in prison? I know that's what we're all fingers crossed hoping for. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments, and while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another video. They call her the female Charles Manson. Sherry Brooks and her baby-stealing cult family. This is a very sick, twisted, disturbing, heartbreaking case, and Sherry might be the most evil woman we've ever talked about. This woman is a monster. Sherry's childhood was a disaster. Her father began to essay her when she was only a baby and gave her the nickname Sugar Babe. Already off to a really sick start, and her mother knew about it and just like didn't do anything. Sherry was removed from her parents' care at age 3 and then was in foster care for 13 years. And it was while she was in foster care at the age of 16 that she tried to steal one of her foster siblings' babies. She was unsuccessful, but this was the beginning of Sherry's odd behavior towards babies, but it was not the end. Honestly, Sherry and her entire family are just weird. When Sherry was 18, she began dating her literal cousin, and the family knew about it. They approved of the relationship and would even call them the kissing cousins.
Oh yeah, they call us the kissing cousins.
And with her cousin, Sherry falls pregnant for the first time and gave birth to a son, but the cycle of abuse continued with Sherry, and she began to essay her son, her infant son, just like her father had done to her. The authorities did find out about this and they removed Sherry's son from her care, but they never gave her any jail time. She never was put on the offender list. In this case, the system fails time and time again. Sherry then ditches her cousin. She gets a new man, and she was actually married to this man within weeks of them meeting. She gets pregnant again. She has another son, and the home that her and her child are living in is disgusting. Her son is being abused and neglected, so the child is removed from her custody again. She then gets pregnant for a third time, and the same thing happens. Within months of the baby being born, it's removed from Sherry's custody. It's honestly so disturbing to me that she can be caught essaying one of her babies and her children are not being removed from her custody like the second they're being born. Honestly, I'm gonna start sounding like a broken record, but Sherry gets pregnant again for a 4th time, but this time it was her first daughter, and it seemed like this time with Sherry's daughter, she was trying to be a better mom, but that was not the case. The reason that she was giving her daughter more attention was because she was also essaying her infant daughter, and she didn't want anyone to find out about it, but they did, and this child was taken from her care as well. And then Sherry gets pregnant for a 5th time. It's another girl, and this is her 5th pregnancy in 6 years. She's only 24 years old, by the way, but same thing happens again. Within 6 months of this baby being born, it was also removed from her custody. Sherry had a really weird obsession with girls and wanting daughters, so after her 2 daughters are taken from her custody, Sherry decides that she'll just kidnap herself a daughter. Her neighbor had actually just given birth to a little baby girl named Vera. Sherry becomes obsessed with Vera. She pretty much decides that Vera is just her daughter. She starts hanging around all the time and actually tries to kidnap her, but she was unsuccessful. But remember Vera, remember this child, because she will be very important in today's case. Sherry finds a new man. She has 4 more children with him. All of them were sons. So at this point, she has had 9 children, 5 of which were taken out of her custody for abuse and neglect, and at least 2 of those we know for 100% certainty was SA, and then she has 4 more children and she's just able to keep them in her custody. And this is where Sherry Brooks's cult family begins, because as her sons grew into teenagers, Sherry began to allow even more people to live with her in the home, and Sherry had complete control over all of these people. She was able to pressure anyone in her world to do exactly what she wanted. Despite being disgusting and evil and a monster, she was apparently quite manipulative and charming.
They call us the kissing cousins.
I don't see it, but let's continue. Sherry still had this obsession with wanting a daughter, having a little baby girl, so she began to force her teenage sons to get her a baby. And she did this by forcing her teenage sons, who were between the ages of 13 and 16 years old, to pretty much just sleep with teenage girls to get them pregnant. 2 of these girls did end up getting pregnant. The first one had a son, which Sherry had no interest in taking. She had 4 sons. She wanted a daughter, and the other girl had a miscarriage. So Sherry decided that she was going to find someone for her 13-year-old son, Zach, to impregnate. And if at this point you guys are like, this is really gross for me to hear, just know it's 10 times worse for me to have to say out loud. So Sherry picks a 19-year-old woman to be with her 13-year-old son. Yep, and it's even crazier because that woman was Vera, the baby that Sherry tried to kidnap so many years earlier. So let's take a quick pause to talk about Vera Jo Regal for a moment. So she was born with intellectual disabilities, and as an adult was said to have the mind of an 8 to 12-year-old, and at 11 years old, she was repeatedly essayed by her own father, which landed him 20 years in prison. So when Sherry reconnects with Vera and offers Vera to come live with her and her family, Vera is excited and she accepts. She's finally gonna have this big family that she's always wanted, but Vera had no idea that Sherry's real motives were for Vera to be with Sherry's adolescent son, get pregnant with a baby that Sherry was planning on stealing. So Vera moves in with the family. She's there for a couple years, and then when Zachary is 16 and Vera was 22, Sherry forces the two of them to sleep together, which did result in a pregnancy with a little baby girl. At first, Sherry treated Vera very, very well up until Vera gave birth. Then from there, she completely cut off Vera from the outside world and eventually cut off Vera from even seeing her own child, because in Sherry's mind, that child was hers. And this is so messed up, but Sherry actually named Vera's daughter after Vera's father, the man that essayed her repeatedly when she was 11 years old, just to psychologically torture Vera. And then the torture became physical. I'm not even kidding. If you can think about the worst things you can do to a person, it was probably happening to Vera. At this point, Sherry had about a dozen people living in her house, and she had complete control over all of them, and all of them were encouraged to take part in the torture, the beatings, and the SA of Vera daily. And authorities were made aware of the terrible things that were happening in this house of horrors. They knew that a mentally disabled adult was being abused, and also that a baby was being raised in these terrible, disgusting conditions, and really nothing was done. Vera was also being starved, like insanely starved. She was getting no food, and one day she ate something that she wasn't supposed to. So Sherry decided that she had to die. Sherry actually ordered two of the people that were living in her house to do it, a 21-year-old named Danny and his 17-year-old girlfriend named Nicole. And both of them were eager to kill Vera because both of them are so sick, twisted, evil individuals. On March 26, 2011, Danny and Nicole lured Vera out of the house. It was the first time she left that house in years, and I'm pretty sure she knew what was going to happen to her. They lured her to a nearby train track where they viciously both attacked her with sharp objects before just leaving her on the train tracks. And when a train eventually did come by, the conductor notified the police that there was a body on the train tracks, and the police officers immediately recognized Vera, knew that she was living with Sherry Brooks because they had come to the Brooks household so many times before. First, Sherry tried to play dumb, but later Danny and Nicole both made a full confession and did say that Sherry was the one that ordered them to do it. Danny was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison, and his 17-year-old girlfriend received 23 years in prison, so she will be out when she's around 40 years old, just free to live in society. And if you're wondering if the other people in the house, but especially Sherry, got any charges for what happened, you know, maybe even conspiracy or accessory to murder charges, you would be dead wrong, because only a handful of people in the house got obstruction of justice charges, which got them anywhere from 30 days in prison to 5 years in prison. And Sherry pretty much walked away with no legal repercussions. It's the biggest FU ever because Sherry committed the worst crimes, the most vile crimes in the entire book, and got away with all of them. And Vera's daughter was adopted by a very, very nice family. She's about 14 years old now, and she sleeps every single night next to a photo of her mother, Vera. This case is so wild. It almost felt like I was telling you the plot of a movie, because I cannot believe that there's people like this out there and that they can just get away with all the awful things they do. If you watched the end of this video, thank you so much. I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow. This is the case of serial killer Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. This might be one of the most messed up true crime cases I've ever read. I mean, obviously, he's one of the most notorious serial killers of all time, but the details in this case are so disturbing and terrifying. But this case does have one of the most satisfying ways I've ever read of a serial killer getting caught and arrested. Richard's father was a hardworking Christian man, but he was also an alcoholic, very angry and very abusive. When Richard was 2 years old, he experienced a traumatic, serious head injury. And then only 3 years later, he experienced a second serious head trauma at age 5. But by the time he's only 5 years old, we have two of the biggest components in like the recipe of what creates a serial killer: abuse and head trauma, but it only gets worse. Richard was about 12 years old. He began escaping his father's abuse and anger by spending as much time as possible with his older cousin Mike. Cousin Mike was a celebrated veteran after serving in the Vietnam War. Okay, so quick history lesson. A lot of American soldiers, a lot, not all, but a lot of American soldiers did a lot of evil things to Vietnamese female citizens during the Vietnam War, like assault, SA, and unaliving them. And Mike was one of those American soldiers. Turns out evil runs in the family. Cousin Mike would show photos to Richard that he had taken of the women that he essayed and unalived while he was serving in Vietnam. Many of the women in these photos would be missing a body part, typically their head. Cousin Mike told the 12-year-old Richard that he did that to the women after he unalived them because the people of Vietnam believed that if you lost a limb or like a body part after death, that you would not be able to go to heaven because he's seriously such a messed up individual. 12-year-old Richard did not think that this was disturbing or gross or cruel. He thought it was cool. He looked up to his older cousin Mike. And then one day, right in front of the young Richard, cousin Mike shot and unalived his wife during an argument. And cousin Mike was found not guilty by reason of insanity for this, spent only 4 years in a mental hospital before being released back into society. Richard is now 13 going on 14 and he's living with his sister and his sister's husband, and his brother-in-law was like an obsessed peeping Tom. So he would take the young teenage boy Richard out with him at night to look in the windows of like his pretty neighbors. It was around this time that Richard, who's 14 years old, got his first part-time job working at a hotel, and he would use the master key at the hotel to break into the hotel guests' rooms and just steal anything of value. It was when he was 14 working at this hotel that he broke into the hotel room of a married couple, attempted to essay the wife, but was beaten up really badly by her husband, but the couple did not press charges and 14-year-old Richard was free to go. As a young adult, he moved to California where he became the Night Stalker that we all know and hate today. His first known victim was a little 9-year-old girl. It was in 1984. This little 9-year-old girl was looking on the street for $1 that she thought she lost. And Richard came up to her and said that he knew where her missing money went, and he lured her into the basement of an apartment complex where he assaulted her, essayed her, and then unalived her. Sadly, this case would go unsolved for over 20 years as it was not linked to Richard until 2009. And it was after this crime that Richard Ramirez started his 14-month-long killing spree in LA and other parts of California. About 6 months into his killing spree, he was arrested for stealing a car. He spent about 1 month in prison for this, but it was this mugshot that eventually led to his downfall. I think the thing that was particularly terrifying about Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, compared to other serial killers is that Richard Ramirez did not have a type when it came to his victims. To the Night Stalker, it didn't matter your gender, your age, your race, or how much money you had. No one was safe when Richard Ramirez decided he was going to break into your house that night. Richard Ramirez would typically hunt during the weekends. It would always be in the middle of the night. He would break into any home. It was completely random. He would rob the house of anything of value, essay any women that were in the house, and then typically unalive or attempt to unalive anybody in the home. And then he began to escalate his crimes in even more disturbing ways, whether it was drawing a pentagram on the wall or taking a woman's eyes as a trophy. First, it was only LA, and everyone in LA knew who the serial killer, the Night Stalker was, and they were all terrified that he would come into their house in the middle of the night. So what does Richard Ramirez do? He begins targeting other cities outside of LA. He wanted the entire state of California terrified of him. It was in one of those other cities that he broke into the home of a young engaged couple that were soon to be married. He shot the man 3 times and then repeatedly essayed the woman named Inez. And then after this, he left her alive and told her to tell them that you just met the Night Stalker. I think that he did this because he wanted the media to link this crime and his other crimes outside of LA to the ones in LA. He wanted everyone to know and be terrified that he could strike anytime, anywhere. But it would be this decision that would lead to his arrest, because now they knew what he looked like, and then they found his fingerprints, and then they had his name. Richard Ramirez was the Night Stalker. And by the next morning, his mugshot was on the front page of every newspaper in California. Now I get to tell you about the most satisfying way a serial killer has ever been caught and arrested. Richard Ramirez boarded a bus to LA with no idea that now everyone knows who he is. Once he gets off the bus in LA, very quickly people recognize him. They begin staring at him, they're whispering, they're pointing at him, and then someone says, "That's him. That's the Night Stalker." Richard Ramirez, he tries to flee, he just starts running, but multiple regular old citizens are just on the street, start chasing him down the street, and they're telling other people as they pass by, "That's the guy." This is the guy that for over a year had been terrorizing their city and killing their citizens. And now there's a mob of them all chasing after him down the street. And then they catch him and then they start wailing on him. There's like over 100, I think several hundred people now surrounding him, and multiple of them have him on the ground and they're hitting him and they're kicking him and just pounding on him. Some local police officers try to go and break up this fight. Well, it's not really a fight, he's just getting jumped. And then they realize that the guy who's getting jumped is the Night Stalker. During his trial, he had a lot of fans. He was like a celebrity. He had a lot of groupies, a lot of females who thought that he was attractive. He was getting hundreds of letters like a day. He was getting multiple marriage proposals, similar to Ted Bundy and now more recently Wade Wilson. This is such a weird epidemic, and we talked about it recently, how women become obsessed with these killers. If you're one of them, you're weird and you need to stop. Richard Ramirez was being charged with the deaths of 13 people and the attempted unaliving of 5 more. This is for the crimes that they had concrete proof that he did commit in LA, but it is believed that his victim count is more probably in the 20s or even the 30s. But he was found guilty of all of these charges and sentenced to death. But he actually passed away behind bars before his execution in 2013 at the age of 53 years old after 23 years on death row. I told you guys that this case was going to be wild from start to finish. I mean, did I lie? You guys have been asking me to cover this case on Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, since I started posting true crime back in January. Typically, I try to cover cases that are a little bit less well known, but you guys have been asking me to cover this case and some of the other more notorious serial killers in history for such a long time. So if you want me to do, for maybe the next 2 weeks, cover some of the more well-known notorious serial killers in history, let me know in the comments. Let me know all your thoughts on this case. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you tomorrow.